Take a breath and settle in. Welcome to Metaphysics at the Movies, the podcast where film meets deeper meaning and every scene becomes a doorway to insight. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing someone who doesn't just watch movies, he reads them. Reverend Rich P. is a Unity minister, speaker, and teacher of practical spirituality, known for blending real-life wisdom with metaphysical truth in a way that's grounded, accessible, and powerful. Around here, it's not just about what's happening on the screen. It's about what's happening within us as we watch. So whether it's drama, comedy, or action, Reverend Rich P. helps us uncover the spiritual principles, the hidden patterns, and the deeper messages woven into the stories we love. Get ready to see movies differently, and maybe even see yourself differently too. Let's get into it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Metaphysics at the Movies. I'm Rev Rich, and I'm glad you're here. Now I have to tell you, after our last episode on E.T., we're making a pretty serious turn. We went from E.T. phone home to Indiana Jones running away from a giant boulder. That's quite a spiritual journey, but that's what I love about doing these podcasts, because spiritual truth doesn't always show up where we expect it. Sometimes it's beautiful, emotional movie about friendship and belonging, and sometimes it's Harrison Ford with a whip. So today we're talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I just started watching the movie again, thinking I was going to talk about courage, maybe even faith, maybe the Ark of the Covenant. But that's certainly plenty we could talk about there, but something else kept getting my attention. Everybody in the movie is chasing something. Indiana Jones is chasing artifacts. The Nazis are chasing power. Belloc is chasing recognition and prestige. Everybody wants something. Everybody believes that if they can just get their hands on this one thing, something will change. And I thought, well, that sounds familiar. Aren't we all chasing something? Maybe it's not the Ark of the Covenant, hopefully not the Ark of the Covenant, but something more. Maybe it's more money, more relationship, a better relationship, recognition of some sort, maybe a title, a bigger house, a different job, more followers, more security, more success. Sometimes we're even chasing spiritual things. We want enlightenment. We want healing. We want our purpose. We want God to give us answers. And none of these things are necessarily wrong, but here's the question that the movie got me thinking about. What are you chasing and why? Because sometimes we can spend years chasing something without ever stopping long enough to ask why we want it. Or worse, we finally get it and discover it wasn't what we were really looking for. So that's where I want to go today. Not just into temples, snakes, and ancient artifacts. I want to talk about the things we chase. And maybe we were actually looking for underneath all of those things. So Indiana Jones is one of those characters who just looks cool doing almost anything. He's a professor, an archaeologist, an adventurer. He wears a hat. He's got the jacket. He's got the whip. We got the music. I mean, come on. You hear the music and suddenly you feel like you should be running through a jungle looking for something. But here's what I find interesting about Indy. He's not particularly spiritual. He's dealing with sacred objects, but he approaches them mostly as an archaeologist. They're just artifacts. Just part of history. Things to be discovered, studied, maybe even placed in a museum. And then he gets sent after the Ark of the Covenant. Now, if you know your Bible, you know the Ark isn't just another ancient box. The Ark represents the presence of God among the Hebrew people. This was sacred, and everybody in the movie wants it to be for a different reason. Nazis want it because they believe it will make their army unstoppable. They don't want God, they want God's power, and there's a difference. That hit me because I wondered how often we do something similar to that. Maybe not dramatically, but how often do we want God to bless our plan rather than asking whether our plan is actually aligned with God? Though we know that could be uncomfortable to ask, but I also have known I've done it. I've gone into prayer already knowing what I wanted the answer to be. Have you ever done that? God, show me what I should do, but what I really meant was, God, please confirm what I've already decided. And if the answer seems to be something else, suddenly we need to pray a little longer. Maybe God didn't hear us the first time. I think we all negotiated with Spirit at some point. We want divine guidance, as long as the guidance goes where we wanted it to go anyway. That's not really surrender. That's asking God to co-sign. And Raider is filled with people trying to use the same sacred for their own purposes. They want the power without the relationships. They want the blessings without the transformation. They want the divine to serve the ego. That's a dangerous territory, not because God is waiting to punish us, but because ego has a way of taking even beautiful things and turning them into something they are not. And then there's Belloc. Belloc is fascinating because he's almost like Indiana Jones' shadow. He's another archaeologist. He's intelligent, he's capable, he understands ancient cultures, but he's willing to cross lines Indy won't. At one point, he basically tells Indy that they're not so different, and Indiana Jones didn't like hearing that. But I think that's one of the most interesting moments in the movie, because sometimes people who irritate us the most show us something about ourselves. Now, don't go too far with that. Sometimes people irritate you because they're irritating. Let's just be honest. Not everything needs a metaphysical interpretation. Sometimes somebody's just getting on your nerves, but there are other times when someone's behavior hits a nerve because there is something familiar there. Maybe they want attention in a way that reminds us how badly we want approval. Maybe their stubbornness looks a little too much like our own. And maybe they need to control everything. Makes us uncomfortable because, well, we may have a little of that in ourselves. We like that holding on to that control. Belloc shows Indy what he could become if the adventurer becomes more important than his integrity. And that's what the shadow does. It shows us parts of ourselves we'd rather not look at. And spiritual maturity isn't about pretending those parts don't exist. It's becoming conscious enough that they don't run the show. And that's why self-awareness matters. Prayer isn't only about asking God for things. Sometimes prayer needs to become, show me myself. And let me warn you, that's a dangerous prayer because Spirit may answer. And you may suddenly realize that the problem isn't entirely everybody else. Trust me, I know. Terrible news, but it's also free. You know the phrase that says that truth will set you free. And then I was taught, but first it will piss you off. Because the moment I can see something in myself, I can work with it, I can heal it, I can make a different choice. So what stays unconscious tends to keep repeating itself. And there's another thing about Indiana Jones that I love. He's incredibly brave. And he is terrified of snakes, and I mean terrified. And I love that because it makes him human. Here's the guy who will jump into moving vehicles, enter ancient tombs, fight Nazis, but put a snake near him and he's done. And doesn't everybody have something like that? You can be strong in one area of your life and scared to death in another. You stand in front of 100 people and speak, then be terrified to have one honest conversation with someone you love. You can lead an organization and be afraid to ask for help. You can take care of everybody else and be scared to admit you're tired. Courage isn't universal, it's contextual. And I think that's important because sometimes we compare our fears to someone else's strength. We look at another person, think they've got it together. No, they don't. They've got some things together, just like you. And they've got snakes somewhere too. Maybe not literal snakes, but something. The goal of spiritual growth isn't to become a person who's never experienced fear. I don't know what the person would look like. The goal is learning that fear doesn't automatically get a vote. I can be afraid and still move. I can be uncertain and still pray. I can be nervous and still say yes. I can feel completely unprepared and still take that next step. We've talked about this throughout the series. Faith isn't the absence of fear. Faith is deciding fear isn't going to be your spiritual director. And then we get to something I think Raiders of the Lost Ark does beautifully. Indy spends the whole movie trying to get the Ark. Think about everything he goes through. He travels across the world. People are chasing him. He's fighting. He's getting beat up. There's snakes. There's explosions. There's truck chases that probably took 10 years off the man's life. All for the Ark. And eventually gets it. Then he loses it. And he gets it. and he loses it. And that's pretty much the movie, which now I think about is also a pretty good description of life. We get something, we lose something, we try again. And somewhere in there, we're trying to figure out what any of it means. But here's the part that really gets me. At the climax of the movie, when the Ark is finally opened, Indiana Jones doesn't win because he understands everything. He wins because he knows when not to look. Think about that. He tells Marion, close your eyes. There's something powerful about that moment. After spending the entire movie pursuing knowledge, studying, searching, investigating, Indy finally encounters something he cannot control or completely understand. And his response is surrender. Close your eyes. Don't interfere. Don't try to possess this. Don't try to explain it. Just let God be God. Now that's a spiritual lesson, because we love understanding. I love understanding. I want to know why. Why this happened? What's next? How is this going to work out? What's the plan and when will it happen? And sometimes there isn't an answer yet. Sometimes the spiritual practice isn't figuring it out. Sometimes the spiritual practice is trusting while you don't know. That's hard because uncertainty makes us uncomfortable. We'd rather have the bad answer than no answer. And at least when we know what we're dealing with, we're comfortable. But faith often lives in a space between the question and the answer. That space where we have to say, I don't know what's happening, but I still trust that God is present. That's a different kind of faith. It's easy to trust when everything makes sense. It's harder when the pieces don't fit. When the prayer hasn't been answered, when the door hasn't opened, when you don't know what comes next, that's when faith stops being an idea and becomes a practice. And maybe that's what Indy learns. There are things bigger than him, things that he can't put in a museum, things he can't control, things that don't belong to him. That's humility in that. And the humility gets misunderstood sometimes. But humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means understanding that you don't have to be the center of everything. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to control everything. You don't have to fix everything. Can I get an amen from every recovering control freak listening right now? Because some of us are tired, not because life has asked too much of us, but because we've appointed ourselves managers of the entire universe. We are trying to control people, outcomes, timelines, opinions, the future, things we've never actually given control over, and then we're exhausted. Maybe the spiritual invitation is put the whip down, Indiana. I don't have to save everything. So the scripture I keep thinking about while watching the movie is Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. I used to hear this verse being read at church or different places, and if it were telling us, and it sounded like it was telling us not to think. I don't believe that's what it meant at all. Use your mind, ask the questions, learn, study, think about what you're analyzing, but also recognize that your understanding has limits. There are moments when you gather all the information you gather, you've prayed, you've talked to wise people, you've done homework, and you still don't know. That's where trust answers. Trust says, I do not need to see the entire road to take the next step. And that brings us to what we are chasing, because sometimes we're chasing things because we believe they'll finally make us feel secure. If I get enough money, I'll be okay. If I get this position, I'll matter. If this relationship works out, I'll finally be whole. If enough people approve of me, I know I'm good enough. And then sometimes we get the thing. And after a little while, it feels wonderful. Then something strange happens. We start looking for the next thing because the object wasn't really what we were chasing. We were chasing the feeling we thought that it would give us: security, worth, belonging, peace. And those things can't ultimately be found in an ark or a title or a bank account or another person's approval. That's the inside work we need to do, the spiritual work. And that's why Jesus kept pointing people back to the kingdom within. He wasn't saying the outer world doesn't matter. He was saying don't look outside of yourself for something that can only be realized within. So here's what I'd like you to do this week. Nothing complicated. I want you to ask yourself one question. What am I chasing right now? And don't judge the answer. Maybe you're chasing a better job. Fine. Maybe you're trying to grow a business. Wonderful. Maybe you're looking for a relationship. Nothing wrong with that. But maybe you're pursuing education or ministry or a dream that you've carried for years. Well, I say go for it. But then ask the second question. What do I believe I'll feel when I get it? That's where it gets interesting, because maybe you're not chasing the promotion. Maybe you're chasing respect. Maybe you're not chasing money. Maybe you're chasing safety. Maybe you're not chasing the relationship. Maybe you're chasing the feeling of finally being chosen. And once you know what you're really seeking, you can begin asking whether some parts of what is already available within your own spirituality, within your own self. Can I experience being worthy without somebody giving me a title? Can I experience love before another person chooses me? Can I experience peace before everything works out? Can I know that I am enough before the world applauds? That's the work. Because when we stop asking the outside world to tell us who we are, we became a lot freer. For this episode, the unity power I want to connect to is wisdom. Wisdom is more as knowing things. Indiana Jones knows a lot of things. Wisdom is knowing what to do with what you know. It's discernment. It's recognizing when to move and when to stop, when to fight and when to close your eyes, and when to pursue and when to release. Charles Fillmore associated wisdom with with judgment. Not judgment in the sense of condemning people, but our ability to discern, to choose, to see beyond the immediate appearance. And maybe that's exactly what we need when we're chasing something. Not somebody telling us the dream is wrong, but enough wisdom to say, why do I want this? Who am I becoming while I pursue it? And does this still align with who I say I am? Those questions can save us years. You know what's funny about the ending of Raiders? After everything Indiana goes through to get the Ark, the government takes it, puts it in a wooden crate, stores it in a warehouse with thousands of other crates. That's it. After all that, no parades, no great celebration, just warehouse. And maybe there's one last lesson hiding there. The things you think are going to change everything may not. Life will continue. There will always be another morning, another problem, another opportunity, another adventure. So yes, chase your dreams, build things, create, love, serve, take the trip, start the business, answer the calling, but don't lose yourself chasing the Ark. Don't sacrifice your peace trying to prove your worth, and don't confuse what you accomplish with who you are, because you were somebody before you got the thing, and you're still somebody if the thing doesn't happen. Your value was never hiding in the warehouse. So let's take a quiet moment together. And if these words resonate with you, affirm them with me. I trust divine wisdom within me. I release the need to control every outcome. I listen before I move. I trust even when I cannot see the whole path. I pursue what is mine to pursue. And I release what is mine to release. My worth does not depend on what I achieve. God is present in the questions, in the answers, and in the space between. I trust the journey. And so it is. So I want to thank you for spending this time with me at Metaphysics at the Movies. I hope the next time you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, somewhere between the giant boulder, the snakes, the truck chase, and Indiana Jones somehow managing to keep that hat on his head, you ask yourself a couple of questions. What am I chasing? And maybe even more importantly, why am I chasing it? Because there's nothing wrong with having dreams. There's nothing wrong with wanting more for your life. There's nothing wrong with pursuing something that matters to you. Just don't get so busy chasing the Ark that you forget who you are without it. Your worth was there way before the accomplishment, and it will still be there after. And if this episode spoke to you, share it with somebody who might be working so hard toward the next thing that they've forgotten to appreciate where they are right now. And make sure that you're following the podcast, be subscribed, because the next time we're going to from ancient temples and archaeological adventures to aliens blowing up the White House. Yep, we're talking about Independence Day. And beneath the explosions, fighters, jets, and one very memorable presidential speech is a spiritual question that feels pretty relevant. What becomes possible when we stop focusing on what separates us and starts remembering what connects us? We're going to talk about fear, division, courage, community, and why sometimes the thing that finally brings us together is realizing that none of us get through this thing called life alone. That's next time on Metaphysics at the Movies. Our summer blockbusters that teach spiritual truth series continues with Independence Day. We are stronger together. Until then, trust the wisdom within you, enjoy the adventure, and as I always say, take that truth and walk with it. Peace and blessings, my friend. This has been Rev Rich.
And just like that, the credits start to roll. But here's the truth. What you saw in the movie is already playing out in your life. So the question is, what are you choosing to believe? What role are you stepping into? And what truth are you ready to live? That's the work. If this episode spoke to you, don't just sit with it. Walk with it. Apply it, live it, let it move through you. And if you're ready to go deeper, more teachings, tools, journals, and ways to activate this in your everyday life, head over to revrichp.com. That's where the conversation continues. Until next time, keep watching, keep awakening, and take that truth and walk with it. Peace and blessings.